Was ready to go?
Shamwich.
Michael Laura Carter, Coimhlint as Bhloscaidh and Jaw and you so good jockey needs to be yeah. You can couple of moments at the sort of something. And Carter is Misha Feargal Bhloscaidh, Léargas Stara, no school, college to school need Márta. If we don't have a program about upper college to first and center for James Nina, but we're on Protastúnach ní bhanan and then we heart. And kind on a new law and Críochdheighilt, Partition, Coilíneachas, Colonialism, agus Coimhlint conflict. I go over, agus an Brian Yanni me no Pori me and kinda trachtarach must mean latara, and a quincy as Gaelic, a tanyard ruddy third politory more Léargas faculty, Cojaku and Shinner and Skyland, and no to be sheets on a glory. As Berta or hour and a pint of shower and me curry make get a shin. So there'll be a mixture. I give my commentary in Irish, and then there'll be an awful lot of material in English in terms of what politicians were saying. And hopefully you'll be able to follow it, even though a good bit of it will be in Irish for those of you who are just learning. Okay. So another a back in Chib and Chin, Facky Shib and Jolly the Edward Carson or T Nalava Jesha and Chin August or T Nalava Play, Facky to David Lloyd George, pre-aware in the Bratnia, George Clemenceau, known Tiger, Canner in the Franca, agus Woodrow Wilson, Luther and Stati in America, because he had a Catholic kid more and through more at Boris and Ye and Kate Cogitondal. It was in Fahawal and through Shin or in Skyland North and Kite Shaw, when Cadre taught on either Féinchinntiúchán, agus Istoha Nisprikana at Dirt Wilson Garowiga and Ye and Kate Cogitondal in a mask. Féinchinntiúchán no self-determination, agus an Coilíneachas no an Imperialachas, and rud a clap Léacht Lloyd George Clemenceau agus Carson. Michael agus the rare mar haims a freed to suit us with Biggie Shiv and Organch, the Pala Johnny Wagamsa, and agus for Carson Hien, Sheesh or an Organch Shaw more nor a Hanig Woodrow Wilson and agus the Goro Stati in America, agus Nadini a Boris and Kiko Cogitondal and Dona Janus Sawachid on Féinchinntiúchán, Dirk Carson Ediri Nigaroshe Giri and Dona Janu Sawal Dun Iminyahas Fuminya hypocrisy. So Shaw being kind for card féinchinntiúchán that their knee jag is a hot jag is a knee jag. Ta the fact Shiv and Chin and Léargas a Léirian and Paul Tehan and Ejeg is a hot jag and a word Sinn Féin mandage real a hot the full block when Sinn Féin Shato a tree as Katie so quick say kind and an all Tehan and Ejeg is a hot jag third chick go to degree public the one who in yerin and because now you'll be real to Bratnia card féinchinntiúchán a fort and cheer shaw K good third shade go shade a rinch and off you féinchinntiúchán a fort and a nation bigger football and doing. Márta dirt shade, ag twistn Kate Cogitondal and they're a veiny shade. And roll soccer in some Coimhlint won the show mar ag shasu sus donna the Hirschen and nation bigger agus an Dalig is in traction the league. And irin yet on fun sochru ir hoggy no gur as gur vedi in Barat Brighton gur cur and Bratton agus in rank féinchinntiúchán a bhain in éan na daoine a chaileann cobu an Garmoin an Oster and Rúis cén arcaid cobu í rudbag acu dar a bhain in Redbridge na máiltefa gon an iad seachtag agus gur chur na búteirí féinchinntiúchán a bhain in éan na daoine seo a chur in láhhaile gur as in Barátaí acu agus fuair an Bratton Graham ar ceantar dar a bhain in Palestine in the end Kate Cogitondal agus tá muid go fáile lé leis na hiarmhaití ban amach sin an lá tániuúin. So páirchaí mé ar an orgaint atá an fun féinchinntiúchán an ró éire i digital féinchinntiúchán an sin tréimhse seo. Mar a leathan thura an socrú Bonráú atá agin a de coin doing a ceiste an ormar sin. Muirtear is tí an go bhfuil gá cheart féinchinntiúchán an éireann. Quarter not porter Turgan ga nation. There she go will nation Britain on and yearn to the hin happy and the Protastúnach the Google, I've had digital fin kindergarten, a ring goal, the national, non national, the heron, non national, Aaron, a digital fin kindergarten. So, but you're doing better, and skills on not do. I guess a good sheer kid in as Ravel, or crazy the hand talk to kid in when a principal and in kindergarten and Feargal cheese, August niece, Dave August niece, Talbot a cred sheet, Guru sheets in the digital fin kindergarten. A cred sheet or national or lay August Guru ga. Charty in Kentucky on the Urine. I guess the Dini better will like me and see her August and number talking to take she lum life rock, not credit here. Go to hash punch not finish it deep shit. And more war a Léarian not who she early. And Shin Arky may earn the NEJ Fiha, August Arky may go hang gasta or a fogrum and Sean will fast in EJ Fiha. August are born in the parliament and EJ Fiha here and Sean will fast it. Hosu sé a hall na cara agus an sin hui sé Institute Presbyteriach tí the old school na Bamrina sin. So agi mu go gaú sin ach ní flé mé godóna sin an léana mar flé mé le sin an early le Léargas ú níhhailm chuine an rud céarna ráfií gá. An sin agi muid an dai a neahí bille omrialtas na Heran sin bille na Críochdheighilt Fríd a farm at Hall Westminster na Hargan si a dúsa siad an sin Solar Coru and Kenyal and Mark Reagan on Stop Reagan and August Gerhanic acht Realtus na Heron a vein, a mean and all in Nijay Fiha, Marsha acht Realtus na Heron, and piece of rocky after Críochdheighilt a vein in Urin, August a Shinna Das and Kenyal Conch Cap Jog will ga Kiar, being Kentucky on an Island Jaw, August in Shin, Arky Merlin era, not an Léacht, a big shop, go asta. Instant sé on the insan ní state mar na vi flachas agus cheernis go fáil ag an Parliament of Westminster town go fáil agus ach úsaidir inise agus a ríis statín ná real rain ná rudig mar sin ná rialtas imal farsa. So seo héad na daoine a bhí ag lé le Clúraigh nó le ceart féinchinntiúchán agus an ceart atá an sin a bhí lochta má ag Woodrow Wilson atá sí an san lár an san cehar puncha déag aige nuair a tháinig na Americani ná bhfuil níor cartú Americani nuair a tháinig Stát in America mar bheith cardún mochaid sa Brazil agus an Argentine níonta mí háta mar dhearmsa nar tháinig Americani mar Americani was fásta. Nuair a tháinig Stát in America steachan san Coimhlint in san céad go dúnta. Bégan do útar an Wilson agus fuair sé Fárinta agus falsoníonta chailúil ar amhainm Walt Whitman leis an job seo anú dá. Bhí san part Stát America sochthú a bhéinú do Winter America. Agus mar a dhéanamh America nar a chéan sé isteach an cogaí, ní dheir sé á Palás America agus Stát America agus na daoine sibhre Stát America tá sé buinte leis an Coimhlint seo. An rud a dúirt siad mar a dúirt George W. Bush céad bliain an éis sin, how much escape the series agus an déana has fod far an dó. My glór. So bhí an cehar pointe déag mar chlár don dún úr a thiocú más an cogu agus mar bhíú ná mas bin a ra mar leisceil the fart Stát America an gogu seo agus a másc na cehar pointe déag seo bhí ceart féinchinntiúchán le bheith ag ahan náisiún. My glór. So ar na really kick go doing of Léargas na Europa ranta imperati vi imperat na Garminion imperat na Hostara imperat na Frank Impel arat na Russia agus vinyard náisiún bige a bhí extracaid son séirse agus sin an faharó Serbach Gabriel Prince big scéú buchar Archduke von Ferdinand Sarajevo ní agus a ceite. So sin an rud a chur Wilson Composi. An virtuala an ga piúda in sin George Clemenceau agus David Lloyd George near credit on. The very in das in Franca agus in Bradney and Yang Cape doing that. Agus Kirschid fin Kentucky a vein go sinna cool. An Warren ach very shit in the Parati here. Make the war. So Tishini Harvey Tabata. Show the car punch a jag. Agus a fáharú sé seo chu táhatar ná naie na daoine difriúile a bhí faoi smacht na nimperachtaí seo, gar héirithe faoi smacht imperach na Bratne, nuair a bhí Roy George ará go raibh Léacht na Czechoslovakia, Léacht na Poloine, Léacht na Hungary, Léacht na Cabébal, a digital féinchinntiúchán, agus nuair a bhí Roy George sásta, Léargas na Húrapa a Harings, le seo bhainte amach, ar nua wahí daoine in Éireann, wahí daoine san Ind, agus san Éigipt, agus fudfáda imperach na Bratne gur cart dóibh siúd féinchinntiúchán a bheith acu. So mar sin ag an am céarna is a bhí an Revlid, agus Revlid sin féin agus an chéalú ar son na publica go le raon seo an Éireann, in san Ind, an ídeag is an ídeag, bhí an slád amritsar agus feicisiib sin ag an Coimhlint ar a thuí cin le garisteach agus rinn sé scris ar a bhíoine neamharmtha a bhí am agadte ar son náisne na Hinde, agus ar nua in san Éigipt ag an am céarna, bhí óslugún na Níon, agus bhí siad san na géirí sír sin bhainte amach fásta, agus cé gur Muslim iad, fachtas náisiúnach liberalach síalta a bhíon. Ní ró Islamachas na rud a bhíon an seo. Seo daoine a bhí brean de rial na Bratne an san tíir seo ó chuí Gladstone agus Israeli isteach in san Éigipt cé go bliain ribe. Ceartúin arc ar céis na Héireann le ráircií de chum, ba ceartúin céis na Héireann a hiagmhail mar rud idir náisiúnta a bhí tábhata agus cireanna don na daoine uilig fudfad na himpeachta a bhí a géirí déanachas agus féinchinntiúchán a bhainte amach. Ar chuoin aon daon a tábhata an seo, i bhírinne, bhí cas na Héireann agus an daon nearn muinte na Héireann seo, bhí sé mar eisiom leir. Dá na daoine donna agus dú agus buí agus achan dá heile a bhí ag fáilint fan imperach fudfad an dóin, agus a híl na daoine bána a Paris agus a London nach rúg siad civilta galore le bheith abal é iad híana rialú. Agus sin an orgain sa dúsíid an bhrát an agus an rang, ní higla déanachas sa chót dá daoine an san Algéir, a gas na Francan, nó daoine an san Ind, mar níl siad bhú fóbartha linn na daoine bána. Agus bhí an chuineathe seo ar a bheith tábhata. Sin an cúla agus a cóthaic a caithí sin sé chuine sa gibna an tám go léir nó tá muid garcar an rud seo. Mar téan an frásara dá íon rial na Héireann siúr go dtí tréimh sa Gladstone san 1880 ag an tréimh sa seo tháinig Randolph Churchill áthair Winston Churchill ag cáil agus dúirt sé trídí olaí agus ben ceart a golaí mai go leor, agus ag an am céarna dúirt Tierna Salisbury a bhí mar omíocht agan ná céile córacht ag Randolph Churchill mar ceanarach na dóirithe, agus bhí an sa deirí ar hall winse an láhan útar amach ar Randolph Churchill, agus bhí sé mar príomh ri cimimeach na Bratne, dúirt Tierna Salisbury ar nós na Hindi agus na Hottentots, like the Hindus and the Hottentots, the Hindus look na Hindia, the Hottentots na Dini Gorma in Afrikas. Níl na Héireannaí in Nan, not in Nineveh, done the Realtas. The Irish are inherently incapable of self-government. So nor the Arkan, nor the Wogamush Contosi, Neil and Lake Shaw, 5 year came Realtas, Duhish, a 5 year came Realtas, Duhish, a Hitama, their Nijeg is a knee, August Nijeg is a Kahajeg. Is sé har a bheith tábhata mar lug sé seo an cóthext inar as Revlid na Héireann amach. Gan ggéir céim rialtas dúthais, gan dúiltú de éiliúr rialtas dúthais don tíir seo, ní bhéú ní déag is sé déag an. Ní bhéú sin féanan agus ní bhéú rud a bhí mar sin an. I bhírinne an frásara a chum na híon tapaí a go go olú le tachiaach nach bhig ó na tóirithe London rinn sé scris ar an orgain to bhí an nasúnachas ban Rockdale, the chud Sean Raymond. Go ró na Héireannaí an an, séir sé teoranta a bhainte amach taobh siad an chóras. An rud a Johnny ná le Galthaigh Westminster agus rialathe an cluthe Lansons agus sa Jerry here Hall bhí fáinne geall an léagin agus Parliament-arás an bhaile fia. Nuair a dimmer siad an cluthe sin ar fá 25 bliain na rudaigh mar sin mar lún fáileisiúil, nuair a tháinig an Críochdheighilt agus bhí sé in am rialtas dúis a thuirtaigh dúiltaí bunaíocht imperial na Bratne glacu leis. Agus feicigh tú an piece of Bhloscaidh seo ó na híon taachtaí agus feicigh tú an cineál deargu a bhí acu ar lucht rialtas dúis ar náisní na Héireann. Agus feicigh tú fásta Today has screamer and Dangan, a United Empire. The imperialist re-Hawata Henshaw. Nicolor, the Stova Bejager Waka Kojab of She, Clar Fashion Shefa, Andrew Bonar Law, and off here or BBC near Art may he and her Márta Galore Shagam Sefa, Andrew Bonar Law, August, if you're in ye, dinner, Gahillis go Humlin, now he in the hot Kenny out of you. Shin, August, and far at T-Blesh Edward Carson, Girach Mary Kieran. August, Shishore and Toffin Star. Shot, Dusage Bonar Law. Case realtas duhish. The Scrissi Yanu and realtas liberal a be give pitching, agus Irish nation da, agus last that a horta na Danish separate. Agus Dusage case Olugus Sinakul, the Bacher Riv Oberton Dinahas in St. Braten. Thirtation, Nerhanig Asquith agus Redmond the Kila, and the Ye Gal, Tahan and Egypt is a J. Con act na Parliament J. Yanish and Jerry Curla Cost na Journey. Or Rocky of Westminster. Her Bonar Law, Mar Canara Nuan, the main happy and the Dory here, she shaw in real to show more Christian revolution, a revolutionary committee. And Shin, who shake upon moral, each fun Vrata Smo, a beyond the review, be the hint happy here, and my 14 to 2 flags in Shin Foster. August Galshe, Gashasta Chain Hinton. And even real to do and I knowing the Gunchi when I go over. And me ul Nijeg is a doye. Dirche, go rudding is larger and tail shaw na trumlock safarmage. When I go over. August and blind are young. Hockey shake a more, less a new VF nor a bonny with. August and me on Márta, Nijeg is a carjay. Or earlier, Cap na Jachty. Hogshe Arrogant the Fred Crawford, the goal Higgin Garmine, I was rightfully I cannot Kaiser, the arm August Gunny afford the new VF, a Hannigan year, and me Abram Nijig is the carjay. August, the top of dogging, Yale and Tom Jones, August Nabi Contracted Nero and Kiltor of Rat and Big on again Tom Jones would be more Rooney, Lloyd George would be more free wire in a cookie. Third, screed Tom Jones Shish, Gurwahi Andrew Bonar Law, Gurbunan the Herony, August Fogri. Dini Echtara Fogri. Rud Karen Karen Labor Carson, Heglum the literature, Privajaha, a ra, Gurhi Shaguru, Hogshe, Nikelchi, a rich nabby who contract for Naran soccer and Lasco, Hogshe Nikelchi. Na Catholic in Yerin, August Dirche, Gur Fochen at you. Instant for her private. Again, I'll be through Egger, a hunt, or I fish and in the car coming, fish and voted on the Mara. The Lintish brought an Ejek as a doyeg, a jacty for clean a muck. Dirche a cart done realtus, Beanie Bokta not room postaku. A hortic Coilíneachas see her. Can't be giving more. La Hobariana. So, being a Dini shot, and as you mentioned, can you Gardini liberal here, Dini my here, Dini more the riot, Dini at the cool that year, Dini now feel ha. And for Takia, Dangan, as Ahan Carn and Emperor. So, Mark and Tour and Virtual and Shaw, Becky to Alfred Lord Milner. I be a month in Gampy Gavin in South Africa. And a word Troha Mila Borach, Pasti, Agus Marad, and Coaches Mubas, a Gogu no Mora, Agus in a fur Fiham Mila, then a Gorum, then and Darna Kogu no Mora. Alfred Lord Milner, I gave Litter Hick Carson, Agus a Codula Carson, and Factus and Eden, Realtus Buhish is Sturu. Alfred Lord Milner, Agus Bonar Law, a Dagri, Canuck and Curry. Canuck and Curry, a Harlem Márta Nijig is a carjay, Shinnery Yulti, na Heffagi, and Arm the Bratne, the Condical Dara, Blaku, the Hordia, Umbiabis. Who watch be other and doing to Onion Faginia, a lehed the Rudchin Kuda. My glory. Be Alfred Lord Milner, I was Walter Long. Be sheets in either more the killer, agus bhunaigh siad the Union Defence League. Agus jaar siad a lugan hien de Coimhlint Hun. An Coilíneach de Lunahóirí. Buana, a goige olu, a harhaid. As a bheith báite I mur na Gaelteach éachtaire. The white settler colony of Ulster to save the white settler colony of Ulster from submersion in the sea of inferior cats. By Walter Long, a yar, filla Rialtas Dúis. By Walter Long, a cred, a rish gur fóghíní iad na Gael, agus báisian a chur Críochdheighilt a bain, agus play much lesson. But tá sé harabheith tábhaid agus diggin tú seo, agus sin an fá nar a bhí sin cearsan agus sína Baconhead, my glory F.E. Smith. Nar a heas cearsan in san Bonar Law the villa Rialtas na Dúis, Rialtas Colonialism na Heron. There's a Carson poured scorn on sham phrases like self-determination. Okay? In Ireland. For nobody proposes to give self-determination. He proceeded to mock other ridiculous phraseology, such as Woodrow Wilson's make the world safe for democracy, which he dismissed as making the world safe for hypocrisy. Within the imperialist mind, self-determination provided a lever to your enemies by which they may, under the guise of constitutional law, attain results which you know in your hearts will be absolutely fatal to your whole empire. Indeed, Carson rejected the one, never mind two nation theory, declaring that Ireland was never a nation. General Durche in St. Parliament's Westminster. Sin an Bonar Law being 3 Léacht gahan Bhloscaidh. Sin an Bonar Law Márta EJP. So, an rud a bhí an faoi seo agus tá sé seo más ar a tábhata, ná bhí feibanna ag na hén táchtaí hen seo. Agus na feibanna bhí acu ar an Feargal síos, bhí siad chailú smach ar chud an lucht ibre mal Partition san treibh seo, agus thug mé cuppa cainteas gilí faoi seo anna hen, ní raithí mé gur bhóna stehan san rud, ach gur chail na hén táchtaí a chur a bheith fiche séchain a hálan na chahra in na pehain áitiile an anar níd fiche, agus níor caisí réad an na náisníthe, nó do luchtan féin, fuair na náisní sé héchain, fuair luchtan féin sé héchain, an drama fuair méidir mód na séchain seo, nó Party look at Belfast, the Belfast Labour Party, Shaw Burtock and Shaw, Dawson Gordon, Sam Cale. Craigny Sam Cale or war na voti. It day canter na shankele. In honor Nijig Fiha, Lani the Hud Sheamus will Connolly Avion. Then I'll be in the Críochdheighilt, I guess be a very socialist occurred around in Yerin. I guess be session or now on a job chummer of you on a digit of him dog 3 car. I'll be share bar and ball. So sin hard bit tábhata. Mar an rud a bhí go ra ó ní déag sa seateag, ná gurú na daoine seo ag agrú na man in na bhfuilse níos mó na duine bhí eile, ag fáil pánis áide dóibh, agus gurú casaigh agus Protastúnach go háirithe na mráins na bhfuilse ag cheap le chéile agus a coibriú le chéile agus fao na chúilsí seo bhí an socialist nó an ceart communist ag teach chun cinna fáiste. Sin féibíonn a mór the party and talk to Olu, agus the Carson, níos mó na Carson fiú, the duine bhí an party and talk to Olu, in na sé chundaí mar a bheith son, níos fuide an na fardar bhainneam Richard Dawson Bates, a bhí an na hanro. Chomh maile seo agus tá sé seo thar a bheith tábhata. Bhí ar na hén táchtaí a bheith ionta curama fan nádar na Críochdheighilt a churthaí a bhain. Mar, nar a chéine siad an Coimhlint solanta Olu a mé bhanan ó níd agus a dóigh, bhí sin faginne ní gondé. Ach bhí an burh acu, tá mar rud é gur churthaí Críochdheighilt ní gondé a bhain, bhí bara caiste go. Agus shréig siad luchtan UVF agus na hén táchtaí a gáhan a monaching agus an úna ná. Agus chomh maile sin, fan tréimh sé seo ní déag fiche, bhí arm public na héirna ceachchan cin go héiríonn san deisgirt, agus buine úsata seo mar leisciil le smacht a chur ar Party look at Belfast agus ar an ceart communist Belfast agus úsata seo mar chuúsré ar an rud a bhí le teachtain san darnach an seo ar an Críochdheighilt, agus minúí mé sin get níos mó rihhád. Ach tá sé ionta tábhata, go dtuigeann sibh go dé a lítíú hir den éadú seo do Parliament nó don Críochdheighilt. Níor bhain sé le féinchinntiúchán. Win sé leis an conceap nach ceart don na híon tapíthe a gúga olú cuairta rinch ná bheith féimú faoi rialtas na néireanna mar a thug siad orthú ná na gaiisteach. Tá sé thóisiimplí sin. Ní ró siad sásta marach taobh tíirmí cothama leis na daoine eile ar an uileán. Waithí siad go ró siad níos far. Agus bhí an meon seo sáte is deach tá fiú bhain ontú was sinna an meon a goteanna a bhí an fud fad an barach na braithní. Ní heaglaat féin rialtas a thuirt de Héarnaí, ní heaglaat féin rialtas a thuirt de Gandhi agus lucht na Hindia nó de Arabí Pasha agus lucht na Égypte. Níl na daoine seo in ná an India nó níl siad tuilte acu, níl siad sibilta go leor. So seo an rud dúirt Andrew Horner rih an cé go bhidó an Andrew Horner a bhí mar éisiire íon tata i dtíir an hás dúirt sé the only ascendancy of our night and chin and Coimhlint Protestant ascendancy. The only ascendancy he knew in Ireland was the ascendancy of industry over sloth, of intelligence over ignorance, and of thriftiness over thriftlessness. So being a Coimhlint falsa, bomenta, agus caiisiad a chud airgid, ní bhád a bhar an airgid a bóca an almadé, mar dúirt an. So, and no act of parliament could change those characteristics of the race that inhabited this island. Sin picture to Robert Lynn, Agahor the Northern Whig, Festery and Tata of a Farste Pass, agus Ger Shaston EJ Fi agus Dallas be Robert Lynn, and one on Christian, a Vian chorus and Idges, he already done the shake on there. Agus Sean what a heel shake from the Cassidy. There are two peoples in Ireland, one industrious, law-abiding, and God-fearing, and the other slothful, murderous, and disloyal. Agus Shaw Birch Fisher in Papa. So Cadé Craig the Danish Shaw for Ceart féinchinntiúchán. Shaw Cheerna Londonderry. And Bwal is Másara for Christian, no the Choira James Craig. And then it's liberally. Craig ní sé mar an taki is mó big Adolf Hitler and Bratton which Loran and EJ Trohanní ara gur Ceart and Bratton cógúla go bheith leis an garman natia, but Shaston donna is Másara in a mask. Scream session or scream Hugh de Fanburg Montgomery agus chud waid an rudí go le mahan seo hagan siad ó Ceart an Hugh de Fanburg Montgomery. Sin donna as Tyrone Haas agus báí the Tawada the Coilíneachas the also Unions Council. Montgomery told Londonderry that the self-determination principle shouldn't be applied if it placed one of the gates of the citadel of an empire fighting for its life into the hands of sympathizers with the enemy, Montgomery to Londonderry. So these remarks are in the immediate period after the 14-point plan that I already talked to you about, and it's in a period where the British are under pressure to introduce some sort of reform in Ireland to placate American opinion and particularly Irish American opinion. So what happens is the Unionists agreed to go into what's called the Irish Convention, which is set up by Lloyd George, essentially to bury the Irish issue and to make it look like the British are doing something about it. But from the outset, the Unionists rejected the concept of self-determination. Londonderry refused to, and this is Shawnee's Fudge and all, and Nijeg Fiha Daw, and Narahushi and Kobe Chara and Suggestions. Londonderry refused to subscribe to the littleness of thought, which envisages a tiny little island speaking a language which no one understands, self-centered, proud, and unduly sensitive. He resented government in the hands of people who for generations have atrophied the quality of governing. Taken to atrophy, decaying, wasting away. Being so lazy or so stupid as not to capture the machinery by merit and not murder. Shaw Litcher Freevita. Shaw Litcher Freevita, Q Kennedy, a Rubinchega election we have to send suggestions. So Shaw Dennis Massera, the go-air of James Craig. Shaw Joseph Fisher, Joseph Fisher, Mark Onedy, now if we go in the Indian Hockey here, a commission the Turan, a Hitchas a killer and EJ Fiha, a Craig Kunsker Skat Joe Fisher, and Purish Gan Card, Higgin Morning Post, Kinnell Skiflock, no, Hans Skiflock, Northern, in Tata, in London. So, Joseph Fisher advised Montgomery that the Ulster Unionists should not make too much of self-determination and only employed the two nations theory as a reductio ad absurdum. Recently, it has come into the field of practical politics, but we have never asked for it or accepted it for its own sake. Montgomery then advised the Ulster Convention delegates that the fallacious and Bolshevik doctrine of self-determination could only be avoided in Ireland if Unionists insist on the same right for the northeastern counties. So Carrie in the Hintblachty, then Jarku Shaw, Glaku le féinchinntiúchán ná le teoiric an Ghanaisiún go hillis go Homlin Sinaku Mór ghai le bach a chur rib íon Cinntiúchán cart agus Shaw an Ionishe. Montgomery claimed that John Vander John, Nijig is an Nijig. Strong as the British argument as regards the safety of the realm appears to be to me. No, you have came to kind of the Aaron more, and I have Jan he unsi or a Bratan. The only way to attack the position with success at present, Constable to Coalition Americana, is to work the right of northeast to self-determination for all it is worth. He made it clear that this would knock the bottom out of the dangerous notion of Ireland a nation, as no home rule arrangement could work permanently without Ulster. Shaw and Fa around the Danish Shaw Ragaru Ga Nation on an Aaron as Guru Ga Chart being Cinntiúchán. Al Kharja Shaw and Dusray Ata and Chopu Bon Rockdale and Ellen Chofi Lahar. Lord Hugh Cecil, then a more Ra Baldan Usakma, Tory more Ra, Dur Session Shaw, Hui Carson a Wallen Shaw, I was Wagashe, a Gurriche, Puslish, New BF for Reach. Now the Curry Lord Cecil, Mar Walden Realtas, I was Kaisha beginning of Gideon Shaw, Guru Carson go find Mar Walden Realtas Shaw, be James Craig Mar Walden Realtas Shaw, and Bonar Shaw go will the Tory Hill London, I got the Hint Hockey and Farty, Scarho on a killer, Ramish, that shit more pud than Farty Kierna, that shit more pud than Léacht Kierna, I got than money up Kierna. Lord Hugh Cecil called for Ulster's exclusion. So Shaw never reached a luch in some parliament. East of Shaw, in line with the wish of the population, the doctrine of self-determination, an expression I am not a great admirer of. So near Christ the Danish on, but we say Shaw Mar and Orgaint, or usage should be le less get a goal than Críochdheighilt. But Sullen Hershey Críochdheighilt of ein beg and dive, Kersey T a Huckru a Gugalu. So Capu Walter Long, the scam Críochdheighilt a Curravine in Yerin. Cap Lloyd George, we co-realtas either the Tory ha and Trumlock Ladger Raku, Agus Skihan the 40 Liberlock, Fui Lloyd George, are in Scrisser a 40 Hien, or White Hill of Amor for you wearing a Bratney, Agus K, a Rin and Ruddo and Egypt Shejeg, Edward Carson, Alfred Lord Milner. Be Nadini Shaw Illy Kangle to the Killer. Walter Long, Agus Shaw O J. Kendall Walter Long, held the Catholic Irish in contempt, thinking of them as clearly inferior to the English both racially and culturally. The Ulster Union Defence League, I've already mentioned. In January 1918, someone asked Neil Carson go file in Coimhlint, but we say Ho Oak, more Lord of the Admiralty, begging the areas, but shouldn't really gonna. Dollins Gill, Monica the press of the Carson, and the 5 minute more launch or Fires Hill or Fat. In January 1918, Long told Carson his resignation goes very near making me curse Ireland and all her works. The stars of the course seem to be working for the Kaiser and their hellhounds. Curse sheesh or Sinn Féin, Shaw and Party or Kai Brexit land and Indian and voted I even EJ as a hot cake. I was on public the Hearn of Ian Shin, the Dal Aaron, a cushion Dal Aaron, or Cuddy Hoose, they hear me on and EJ as an EJ. Hugshay, vile criminals who must be exterminated. For and Shin. Vi sé vi yacht again, vi boaging again, well not me boaging, yacht more again. And you curse a cush game around. At rin sé shot heart or nillen. I can say squeechy for not. And progralish Ankara her agus in the jockey buck more ama or bad. Rawa the Lord Lesh Shin and die or Hanik sé or in Can Cap Shaw. Agus it killed in a cordy Shin a rinche Latini. We say Lord the James Craig. Agus third James Craig, agus Donna's Gill, be James Craig agus Walter Long and some Ronald Kieran and some Realtas of London. Third James Craig, ni Higlat ni Cumby a work with me. Near Wailen ní Gundy. Caihi much Trumlock Boon Protastúnach have agin in San Realtas Nui Shaw. Agus Sharon Internet Walter Long ní Gundy morning to the Léargas fire. The inclusion of Donegal, Calvin and Monaghan would provide an access of strength to the Roman Catholic Party that the supremacy of the Unionists would be seriously threatened. So shin, I'm going fuck. So now ni Rowan in Tachti Marshaw. See in Tachti on a Credenson and Brock be shot the boss or something and Brock up a Rosasta cut on the Fenia hurt on a custody. Then Aku shoot and shin and back into the farshin or Tina Law Jesha. Shin Ambrose in Quantine Ricardo. Shin La Shin Dana the Kulu Gudok, a force le Bon Protastúnach as your own, but Walden Usakma or Sam Mills. How she share for an cricket, in a follow cricket home wolf on Pussy Sam Mills. How she arrogant done ish. Hockey share the country Gilligan's and counter knee bigger jahe. Up imperially on Creche and Mosgara and Barata. Agus be session. Nur a whole session go Craig agus Carson go Shregan Monaghan Cowan agus doing another check. He how much well he more teeny continue as well. Go may unique on the on. Say I go Ryan Shaw. So we Ricardo went into Kawata in some other shrift either me a Márta and EJ Fiha nur a high Coilíneachas olu vote or son the Creek Edge shake on the and Shin Ricardo agus Dini a Cowan Monaghan agus doing an all. Dadri Sheets and Crinu Egandala Ella of the Valtanye, like Port Duflin the Craig, a Kati would to Yanu Shaw, but Carton the Dean Ahan Karn the Kug Olu away from real this new Shaw. Could you have the Cardishan? He need more to Conu. Now, and me only be Egerson no, go may you ahan than able to Kenyan Márta, the Killa go shaken, the classic as Protastúnach. Dolum check cat, Lilin and Oregon, and he had all post. Into Tabata at Lacu Mar, then the true cannery is most constable special to Olu in the NEJP. But Kaberi, Carson, Scream Carson, let your head Montgomery and EJ is an EJ, a rin Kenyal Makala or a Raja Hanahan Agi. Our policy should be that in the event of it being founded that devolution was a necessity, I made Parliament on Maliclea, we demand a subordinate Parliament for Ulster. Shane. Ricardo resigned in anger and disgust and claimed that Carson on the 10th, Mia Wart and EJ Fiha, Nera Dirchid Shea Cundy, fell from the pedestal that many had placed him on. Elsewhere, he criticised the narrow Belfast clique who ruled from Old Town Hall, Shin Dawson Bates, and claimed that he represented a strong minority of loyalists who wished to give the simple covenanter an opportunity to prevent the covenant being torn up. Shin Abram. EJ Fiha was feet August Abram Arishan Tan Stock Shin Oka lecture and Shin so Dabring Nadini Shaw Crinuella and a Carson Trasa balance scale near High Carson Armor B a Google Olu like Honey Shay Assassin but rather like Captain Shaw the Kenyal Okachi Bhloscaidh Yannick and then I ran another learn or Richard Dawson Bates be shame arcade Ira Growy after now Growy Bala Gomanashna a real James Craig. Be James Coney right be Cham more James Craig people meet about Coney James Craig assassin. Drasta James Craig or Skull assassin. Or Marflinian to James Craig of George. Ni being a golden or no than ask Quig Olin. Ha go Josh Chef. Skull Pop assassin again. I'll need Muhammad and what so or in Coogan I mean about the name. There Montgomery for Creek Shea Cundy. It is not a question of ethics and honour, but a question of arithmetic. James Craig pamphlet like Jersey. The 6 counties are the citadel of Ulster Unionism. If we are unable to hold the outposts, Cowan, one of them doing and all, must we refuse the offer of the undisturbed position of the citadel? The covenant cannot be construed as a compact for suicide. So Shinnon rub the hard. Blanchard and Clea Shaw, Jerry Law, Trumlock Island Shaw. Agus in Shin. Agus must mean location of Corum, Curry May Jeffers and Kind of basic and on John the Dog, Corum. Agus Shaw, Stream F. Shaw, to Alton Street, Agus Ahmed Dagum Sophie Shaw, Dagri, Edward Carson, Agus Richard Dawson Bates, Gebert, the Nibliha, As. nó lompush an téanú lás fí míúil ní déag fithe. Bhfuil cearsan le drama thosaí sé agus is stúr dás an bit the Ulster Unionist Labour Association, dúisigh siad lipid the Ulster Protestant Association, ag Ulster Unionist Labour Association a bhíon mar atá le Feargal in St. Cartman's acu. Bhfuil cearsan lá solar thug sé órid ag fannachaí ag cuairt amach fa lucht ibre agus fa chin féin agus dir sé is fuailm bréthir ceann bart and hit words without action. Agus in céad lá rás an sira darna lá déag go 12 hui the UPA sta Workman's Clark agus Harlan Wolf i dám lom dagli siad crunithe agus glan siad ahan caisleach agus ceart cumana ama as an dá long close smó agus in na leichen donation hui siad hart na telecarty na leichen innerlach a Mackie Sirocco glan siad ahan den ama. Agus rin siad seo mar go ró árat a bheith dílis dun rialtas nua a bheith le teach a bhaim an bhíon ar dun chun post a bheith to she ho simply sin. So the vigilance committees acu agus near lig siad duna arás go dtígar tíní siad jarú na fórógra rá nó tamis siad dílis agus near lig siad a Protastúnach a dá caslagaí hat arás acu. So sin rud rin siad. Now, cinneal go tós Kimadacht an rod ná gur chuirú 8,000 más a títhe agus 6,000 as a Boston am farste sílamsa go bhfuil golóir féine sé an gur chuirú 3,000 más a tíhann san tréisisin an gablion in é seo. Gur rád 1,000 duine na 600 agus gur chuirú 10,000 duine as a Boston. 10,000 duine as a Boston. In miúil agus be mé inta onri agus bor fi amas mé vi glanú esnach an in nach domána na a chuirsí brúgar a an caiisteach agus ar an drom mór mé goir agus a mé lunasa nar a scíú Oswald Swansea an duine a scéim Thomas McCurtain ar bar a Corky agus chuir go leis na garha chun é finne sábailte chuú ahan ile caiisteach a más leis na garha mé goir agus ní seo compta ní rud a bhí fui seo tá an éine se onheagla gol heag an Lorlan leis na garha agus arca. Is léir agus seo na chefií caiiste go hasfuil fáte hí sem maiile lia. Agus seo an drong taobh mí de cheap páiriste leis na garha. Tá tuairiscí an gur wat siad ahan teat tarbanne mar gur leis bhí tradiisiún an mar fáte a leis na garha gur leis na caiisteaí. Na tí het tarbanne gur ar na solar in éad an tuisce bhatha agus beora le gála más tú chuir siad na tí het tarbanne trí hinne an sin thuí siad ag teap paráiste agus gáid siad an rud go talú ach bhí siad ag caiithú iad an sagart agus iad a goldá agus an láidir John bhí picnic acu le na pláistí tí bhhuiide sin é ort Hertford Orange New Orange, no Pope, sin teap paráiste leis na garha. 3 céad teirla caiisteacha as leis na garha. Agus now stúr deir sé ribhain sin na Westminster that sin nuach an a chrúthaíonn go bhíonn go ró canasachtaí an tachtataí riordan rud seo. Now tá stair a muon seo inniar ní rósaigh cearsan agus tríochtaí seo, but fiú má tá sé sin fear. In dhéanaan amachtaí seo, from Craig Bratach or na daine a Harlan Wolf. Do I approve the action used by his take? In the past, I said yes. She'll scream in Yelan, Avan Kayla. James unfurls a big Union Jack for them and makes a splendid speech that he approves of their action and are not allowing the destroyer element in their midst, i.e. Castigy of his card company. Carson in the House of Commons. I am prouder of my friends in the shipyards than of any other friends I have in the whole world. So, parliamentary progress. August pass of them. Go will me shocking the tone of Asha, so stopping me river. While I'm just there are tattoo Yanu Shinwai George, I was kind of around, but there are tattoo Yanu Argines, not the Indian Cudway Dini Lesh. Has she in the top of the me and an Inishaga? David Lloyd George freely admitted that he had Shaw and Shrew August and Léacht Journal, the Villa Unreal to Snare and Chin and Villa a yard Walter Long. You're not or Knoxer. So Romo watching. So David Lloyd George freely admitted that he had absolutely no doubt that an emphatic majority in Ireland would demand independence and an Irish Republic if granted self-determination. Nevertheless, the Empire would never consent as it threatened its self-interest. Chief Secretary Ian McPherson invoked the barbarous word self-determination in support of a Parliament for Ulster by confirming that an Irish Republic can never be tolerated. Indeed, he then lamented Sinn Féin's bravado as there could be no more suicidal policy than the establishment of an Irish Republic. Now, Plasty Shawnee Higgins here and not Plasty the Glory or Corby. Now, J.R. Kleins and Partition Sasson condemned six-county partition on a religious basis, which recognised neither the historic unity of the province of Ulster nor of Ireland as a whole, before outlining the hollow government platitudes surrounding the desire for ultimate Irish unity through the proposed Council of Ireland. In short, the Government of Ireland Act would not remove but deepen the friction which has long prevailed, emphasising the creation of a helpless permanent minority of Northern Catholics and the marginalisation of working class politics in the favour of institutionalisation of sectarianism. Agus and will show fear will Dirch Jar James Craig Garrow. There's not the slightest hope of that union, the United Ireland, arising in the lifetime of any man in this house. As the Belfast Parliament represented the realisation of the objects which we aimed at when we raised our volunteer force and we armed ourselves in 1914. Your Bonar Law, given a Bonar Law, granting self-determination to Ireland is like living in the world with his eyes shut. Law furthermore scolded the childish mistake of ignoring Ireland's centrality to national security. In short, self-determination for imperial possessions had never been adopted by any nation in the history of the world except after defeat and under compulsion. Arja near Craig na Dini Shaw of féinchinntiúchán. Where she had Críochdheighilt of Aimaniran, le féinchinntiúchán a Yuldu. William Addison, Party Liberal, criticised our stupid, senseless, male-fisted policy in Ireland, which robbed Britain of the credit earned in the course of that great struggle, or some of the national biggest like Coimhlint Coilíneachas. Lloyd George spoke of self-determination as far away as Paris, Acne Horiche there. He talked about self-determination in Paris, he won't give it to Ireland. Third Lloyd George, it is inconceivable to adopt a policy applied in the debris of the Austrian Empire after Shotty War, Britain would resist an independent Ireland to the utmost of its strength. He admitted that the vast majority of the Irish people wanted a republic, but that was only because, in a moment of temper, they lacked the intelligence to realise that independence for Ireland would be disastrous to her own future, and thus the demand does not represent in the least her own real mind. Do not, therefore, he concluded dismissively, let us talk about self-determination. So Hitler munch in a heron. Vote their son, féinchinntiúchán. Rinshid and Rud Canon Kiernas, Rinshid Nijig and Hopjig, a reach of me honor, August me a vehev Nijig Fihe, instant Hehe Nachela. Vote they. But as you shato Queen Gade, the winter in a heron done full block. And me honor, August me vehev Nijig Fihe. Near Holame, Lahed the Horu Machine referent, or you know as a Henry. I was third by George. Now, need Higland Block edition, fucking Carla, there's data. So, Iraq, Orista. So, could you hear in shit? I'm sure not any yet on Fogram, because yet on the Jaberha, Flush Longer, because I handle machine. Right? And now he read us the Bradney Stag, or Kaishin the Dini Shaw Prison. Cruhy shed force a past life. Agus tell you Léacht. And me Vanner when EJ Fiha. Agus Sturha. James Craig, Agus Fred Crawford. Wall Bonar Law. Constable Special to Olu. More force a pass than in the Coimhlint Coilíneachas. Screeve Ambrose St. Quentin Ricardo. Give him Ambrose St. Quentin Ricardo. Mamran, like Jeremy Yerdafor, Eralish and UVF at your own, Nabi Bertha, Neil on instant all well disposed citizen, up to here, camouflage, Sean UVF, Lahady Statue. Glower. But while I'm sure Eralish Erish, the cool economic done, begging that you be the Protastúnach Jeelish, the Posta A, in the Honna Jibber Smo. In St. Tushert, Iganon Kierna, be real as the Bradney, a Kershaw William Punter fight, or Gav Lane, don oors a pace, A specialty, Lan Amshire, B specialty, Part Amshire. Make it over. Show statistic, dog credster, agus sin plan like Mahan a worry, the test, Neil and Palmagam, the Gullis Jack for Rule 1 or Shin. A short statistic, D. An eject fee car, nor new 4 or be on in St. Tushkirch, agus being Kogu Cara, Hart in St. Jeskirch. Assassin August Savrachin Big, the far pace, Jeremy Paler, the Paler away on, Dahan Shay Kid Kega dinner. In St. Alban, the Paler away on, Dahan shocked Kid dinner. In St. Shay Condi, the Paler away on, Dahan Kid Dihid dinner. August na pace Illig Jerry hit in Maiden train than fob. Name Rashaw, so David Lloyd George, and then a worry and force Shaw Rashaw, me bought an eject fee had all solar flesh and Kogu Car and suggested. Third check Gurb Onan, exact analogy, Judge, Gurb Onan, the specialty, August Fascisti Mussolini. Ger Shaker, Hushi and Kidnage Illigo Hui, Le Dune Water than Vinny, and Vinny Cassidy, and the third check Idern and Lalin, Gur Hugmuch Gunny, the Dihid. A hawk Mila Protastúnach. Rahim Shear, agus Sean Major B, the Ra, Ambrose and Quentin Ricardo, fa umper na specialty, and Snashay Condi, that their Nijek Fiha, agus Nijek Fiha dog. Their Chaker Cruhishiat, a group of personal blood feuds which will last for generations to come. Iganam Kierna, me bought an Nijek Fiha dog, nor the Lloyd George Rashaw, the Richard Dawson Bates, Kevin of Richard Dawson Bates, Curshession, act Cookie specialty. The vein, right? The force, the three Slandala is reigning in Eher na Europe. We should hold in Shin good your Balfour Boster, a be more Ira Grohi Bala, I can shin pre Ira than Afrikas from Críochdheighilt, their session, Godoriche, he would be willing to exchange all the legislation of that sort than Críochdheighilt, Part 8, for one clause of the Northern Ireland Special Part. Now, I wrote the Harla the Conry Angla Aeronaut on August he was she Alta Adoye Jersey Gomay Commission the Touran on Hitch Commission and Touran Asakila Kush in the top of the Sean Mark Guru and Luther Mansion in St. Victor on McNeil more Omadina Heron August ni when we got to be into Garland Sean the Higlash Cack my want you if you're in you the change she star in a Heron Mark is Doha and then it's now Iruni. Or point Egalis and Politiak for you. I'll tell you Shin or Naya, Hui and Bratch and Shearer are on focal soccer. The Lynn, the Nisperati, the Conry Angler Aeronaut, and Sonora, August and Gabriel, Nijek Fiahian, Yal Lloyd George, Don Michael Collins, August the Arto Griefa, go we cheat for Monarch Chiron, Kahar Gura, Arbaha Haas, or doing Haas. Nor a Creighton, Commission the Turin, nor a Scap Joe Fisher, and Thursday morning, but Kim up Joe Fisher. Shears the launching, report for Fihish Line on him. Scab Session and Skill, ni will go be after your beam. Margaret and Curry and Rodrigo Child, Curry Jerry the Coilian a Heron, Kevin of Coilian a Heron, and what be go Cur era Arashikilla. Then we got around Rodiganella, a tie into Tawata. So, Gunner be a year ago, Realtus na Bratney, the Geary and Críochdheighilt a Hawkins, because Margaret Shin, Gur Curshi had Coilian a Heron as Jat and act Belu, Realtus na Heron. Tafragra away at the Champion. Kendai and Ephron able to shockings the Críochdheighilt, treating Críochdheighilt a Curvine. So, could you ever and see that show? Current Bratton, fake imperial soccer or job. No more a hug devil era, Aaron Rodiganam. Yale and Searstad, Muncher and Tuskirch, Cahar Fontan dinner, or why hell a fake. Not linear, not long. August could carry in the hemp block for the show. Because you jury on the job summer, Tehin Achila and EJ Fiha Daw. Because you jury on the job summer, Tehin Stormont, Fiha Hawk. Commission Leach, a crew, no, a Logama, Techiant Nua, and a ring Kinchibe, not row, from not hashtag a con hatcher being some real to shake on the act in Ian Fian. Tarim Jason and Shin and 10 piece of Rapia, the Star Stormont, are a Hanig Ufarti National. Hug Aaron Lepard, sin sé nóí ón bhealaigh síos ar an tuaisceart mar deascarach an tromlaí. When na hén taachtaí a hartfa idir trá agus beithid séchain ahan péhan. Fihe chuig acu ní rú commórtas a bhí Bhí fihe sédaí ort a tromlach a bhealga. Cur a géile bhíon san déanathe san sé chundaí ar 5 bliain. Ní rú chancar bhí nach méú Partition táús a rialtas. Sin an cléimrint agus chuig nuí mé ar seo mar chun urafleig sin chun ró úsa créide an nachre. Seo Comisiún Cameron. Seo Britainach ón Alban Jack Cameron, so ní seo farbag ó Jerome Her ará gurú cléimrint a bhain session. The arrangement of ward boundaries has produced a permanent unionist majority which bears little or no resemblance to the relative numerical strength of unionist and non-unionist areas. There is very good reason to believe the allegation that these arrangements were deliberately made and intended to favour Protestant or unionist supporters in making public appointments and in manipulating housing allocation for political and sectarian ends. Stop share. Yes, Derby.
Mila mai agad sin Feargal. Thanks a million for that, Feargal. We'll cast. Does anyone have any questions I want to throw in the Feargal?
I can speak in English, I'm afraid.
No problem, no.
I just wanted to know that was the boundary of Northern Ireland chosen, or at least the county selected, is wherever a constituency in a particular county returned a unionist population, and then that whole county went.
No, that was proposed in March 1914. That was called county option. Herbert Asquith proposed that there would be a vote inside all the counties in Ulster, and if a majority voted to remain outside the Home Rule Parliament, but without a Parliament in Belfast, still attached to Westminster, that counties would be able to opt out. Now, it was originally to be for 6 years, okay? So Carson rejected this. Carson called it a sentence of death with a 6-year stay of execution. But the reason why Carson objected to this was that in the autumn of 1913, he had already privately committed to 6 counties because he knew if he lost the Unionist throne in Fermanagh, his entire movement would break up. So Carson writes in a letter to Bonar Law, I think it's in October 1913, that he's going to insist on the 6 counties of the plantation, which was historically inaccurate because Antrim and Down weren't part of those, the plantation. But he was as bad an historian as he was a politician, you could say, but he was actually a very, very good politician. But so that becomes what he calls his irreducible minimum. He cannot budge from that because he knows if he budges from that, his entire movement will disintegrate. So that's why whenever the Buckingham Palace Conference begins just before the First World War, John Redmond can't give Tyrone and Fermanagh away because there's nationalist majorities in Tyrone and Fermanagh, and Carson can't give them away because it will lead to the disintegration of his movement. Some of his leading supporters, Duke of Abercorn, Duke of Lord Unforty, they're all centred in Tyrone. Okay, with Basil Brooke, who'd be the future Prime Minister, leading member of the British Army in this period, Fermanagh. So the Unionist population in Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan are numerically insignificant enough that you can take the hit, that you can present it like that. But if you lose Tyrone and Fermanagh, you risk your entire movement disintegrating. And in the early months of 1920, it looked like a large section, not by any stretch the majority, but a large section of the working class in Belfast were prepared to accept Home Rule. We're prepared to accept Home Rule, and we're voting for parties not based on the national question, but based on class interests. So you have things like the Belfast Labour Party getting about 25% of the vote across majority Protestant constituencies in Belfast and local council elections. Now, are these people Sinn Féiners? No, they're not Sinn Féiners, but are they in favour of partition? No, they're not in favour of partition. They accept the British Labour Party's position on Ireland. This is that Ireland should get self-determination, i.e. the British Labour Party says there'll have to be a concession in terms of empire in the Commonwealth, but there should be a unified parliament in Dublin. So that was the argument the whole time.
Oh, right, thanks. It's amazing actually how the way they talked, those politicians in those days, you just could not do it nowadays. And I think too, it's it's very telling in the way that they couldn't say, oh, Ireland can't separate, can't be independent, but we can create Poland, we can create Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and all the beaten side of the First World War. And then we can go along and divide up the Arab world, British and French, you know.
Draw lines in the Levant and
Palestine. Yeah, it's just amazing.
In 1917, Balfour, who's in the cabinet, Balfour, by the way, there's a brilliant cabinet committee meeting where he basically rubbishes the idea that Ireland was ever a nation. Yeah. This is the same guy who declares that he's going to set up a Jewish nation in the Mandate of Palestine. But that's not even the worst. During the entire period, then the British are collaborating with Arab nationalists in Palestine. Lawrence of Arabia promises the creation of an Arab state. So what you can see here then is this dichotomy that isn't unique to the British Empire, but it's a dichotomy of power. Is the idea, but the rhetorical devices that are used to disguise and to legitimize power. We are in favor of democracy. We are liberal. You know, we are progressive and we are civilized. Against, well, that actually would affect our strategic position. So we'll apply it selectively. Which, in some respects, you can give Carson his dues. He was honest. When he stands up in the Parliament and says, "Making the world safe for democracy, making the world safe for hypocrisy."
Yeah,
we are the biggest and the most powerful country in the world, and you're going to do what we say. That's I just right.
No, it's just the way they could upset. I mean, everybody was saying really racist, terrible things, you know, in those days, and you were able to get away.
Then again, you see, racism was considered practically a science. Winston Churchill was the vice president of the first international eugenics conference. He wrote letters to Asquith proposing the sterilization of poor people in London. You know, their contempt for Irish people and Indian people and Egyptian people and black people in South Africa was only matched by their contempt for poor people. They really hated poor people, like the scum of the earth. That's why they wanted to bring down the Liberal government. This Liberal government was going to take your money off you, you know, in the House of Lords, and take your power away from you. And they were going to give money to these people for nothing. They were going to like give poor pensioners money. And they were going to get some person who hurt himself at work, they were going to pay him for a while, like give him sick pay. That's, you know, and that's, but in that mentality, you might say people can't say that now.
Did the First World War make them feel worse and make them have a, you know, did the scars of the First World War in the British government give them more of a stronger kind of a racist kind of an attitude, or would they sometimes I think when Irish independence they would just tired of the whole blooming thing and just let them go, you know?
No, what they were looking to do was they were looking to shelve the Irish question and maintain their interests.
Yeah,
they were looking to make sure that a campaign for an Irish Republic was defeated. That was their big mission. Now there were several strategic things here. The first thing was an immediate strategic thing that Bonar Law talked about, was that you would have essentially a hostile island next to your island, and in the event of a subsequent continental conflict, which happened, you know, a generation later, you'd be worried about Ireland. Now they had nothing to worry about. The 26 counties, although they did have the 6 counties, they did have Northern Ireland, and it functioned as a base for them. They'd given up the treaty ports after the economic war, and De Valera was actually, despite, you know, the notorious going to see the German ambassador and everything in Dublin, De Valera was a constructive neutral during the Second World War. They didn't really have to worry about that, but that was one of their big worries. But their second big worry is contagion. If the Irish can challenge the empire, Lloyd George writes a letter to Winston Churchill in May 1920, just a couple of months after they've sent in the Black and Tans, and he says, you know, we're going to have to do something about Ireland. De Valera is making us look silly. Churchill gets up the next week in Parliament and says, we're not going to give a republic to people like the Black Leopards of West Africa.
No.
And then 2 or 3 weeks after that, you get mass expulsions in the shipyards, and you get the cleaning up of the economy in the north. And this is, you know, and let's be very honest about this. This is the manipulation of quite long-standing sectarian conflict based on basically the history of this area. But it's the accentuation and the emphasis of this and the institutionalization of it. There were signs that a lot of people were kind of thinking about things in a different way. We're thinking about things more progressively. The very nature of this settlement locks that into your next 100 years. You know what I mean? It's toxic, you know.
I think Scottish independence is going to be very interesting. I think
Yeah, but it's a progressive type of cosmopolitan nationalism. It's not some sort of, you know, that's the big thing that you need to think about, is that what was the issue? What was the issue with not granting Ireland independence when the majority of people in Ireland wanted independence? You know, because they might have said, oh, we're going to get discriminated against, or this. The historical evidence doesn't suggest that would have happened at all. I think the evidence seems to suggest that it was the maintenance of position and power. It was, and the implications would have had, the wider implications it would have had for the empire. It's very ironic that James Craig is saying, you know, do you have to give the citadel up for the outposts? You know, that the covenant is not a contract of suicide. You could say the same thing about Brexit.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But say we can have our Brexit, and we might have to lose, you know, some of our best supporters in the north. But
yeah, no, exactly.
The Brexit agreement is not a contract of suicide.
Yeah, I don't think the Brexit saga is nearly finished yet. You know.
No, it's not. No, nowhere near. Nowhere near.
Interesting. All right, thank you, Cormac.
No, Brian.
Okay, has anybody else any more questions for Feargal? Cester Biella? No. Okay, Feargal. So, míle buíochas sin. Thanks a million, Feargal. For our insight, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say Gar míle maiagat. Okay.
I'm more part of it.
I'm more of